Welcome, everybody. Hello. Welcome to Transnational Popular Music and Dance of Brazil and Ireland. My name is Bryan McCann. This program is part of Educarte's 2020 virtual performance series. Educarte is a cultural arts education nonprofit organization that builds communities by connecting artists and audiences. Educarte creates engaging performances and educational programming that highlight the value of cultural expression. To learn more about our organization and upcoming performances, please visit www.educarteinc.org. So, thank you so much for joining us, and it is a privilege to introduce our distinguished musicians and dancers, Rob Curto, Paddy League, and Kate Spanos. Hello, everybody. How are you?
Hey.
Yeah,
Hey,
great
Bryan.
to have you here tonight. So let me introduce you in turn here. Rob Curto is an accordionist, pianist, and composer based in Philadelphia and is the band leader of Fish Harmonics, influenced by decades of music making around the world. Steeped in American jazz piano standards, Rob discovered the accordion as an adult, and his curiosity led him to Brazil on a Fulbright, where he ended up living on and off for several years in the Northeast, learning and absorbing the music traditions, especially the piano accordion. Rob was part of establishing the Forró scene in the US with Rob Curto's Forró and toured the world with his Brazilian bluegrass band Matuto. Curto has developed an interest in Irish button box, adding button accordion to his repertoire, studying with NEA National Heritage Fellow and All-Ireland champion Billy McComiskey, and with others. And fun fact, Rob and I also went to college together, where he rocked the quad with a band known as the Toon Dogs.
Right.
So it's great to be reunited here. Paddy League grew up around traditional Irish and Greek music and dance, and by his teenage years was performing professionally throughout both diasporas on a number of string and percussion instruments. For the last decade, he has devoted much of his time and energy to studying the button accordion, music of Northeast Brazil, particularly the style developed by the Calixto family of Campina Grande, Paraíba. He's currently assistant professor of ethnomusicology at Florida State University and director of the Center for Music of the Americas. He's published widely on the music, dance, and oral poetry traditions of the Aegean Greek islands and is working on several print and multimedia projects in collaboration with Luizinho Calixto. Great to have you here tonight, Paddy. And our host and performer, Kate Spanos, is a dancer, educator, scholar, and arts administrator whose work focuses on dances of resistance and social change through dance. She, like Paddy, is also half Irish and half Greek and grew up Irish dancing in Washington, D.C. She completed an MA in traditional Irish dance performance at the University of Limerick in 2008. Her doctoral dissertation at the University of Maryland focused on the St. Patrick Festival and masquerade dances of Montserrat, known as the Other Emerald Island of the Caribbean. She also practices various Brazilian movement forms, including capoeira, frevo, and samba. And in 2018, she was a postdoctoral Fulbright scholar in Recife, Brazil, where she studied popular dance of Pernambuco, including frevo, cavalo marinho, and maracatu rural. All right, so great to have you as an Irish American guy who fell in love with the music of Brazil. It's such a thrill to be with you here tonight and to learn that, you know, I'm not the only one with this kind of connection. So I'd like to learn more about how each of you developed this connection between Brazil and Irish music and how it's really enriching your approach to the arts. So let's start with you, Rob. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I've been playing Brazilian music since around 1998, and kind of discovered it through starting to play the accordion, and was introduced to Brazilian musicians in New York City, where I was living and already working as a musician, and discovering this music and discovering the accordion tradition in Brazil with artists like Sivuca, Dominguinhos, who are mostly accordion, piano accordionists. So it's a big. They're usually big accordions. They have 100. They say that's like uma sanfona de 120 baixos. It has 120 basses on this side, and so there's these sort of big instruments. And I got involved with playing that music, and went to Brazil a couple of times and started to meet people there and kind of get deeper into it and understand it better. And I discovered sort of two different traditions: the Choro tradition, which is kind of based originally around Rio, and the Forró tradition, which is in the Northeast. And I went to Recife, the capital of Pernambuco, and met some musicians there. And one of my first experiences in Recife was getting to the house of Arlindo dos Oito Baixos, which I'm sure you probably met Arlindo. I'm not sure if you did before he passed away.
No,
it's been a number of years now since Arlindo is gone. But I got the phone number of a musician, Raminho, and I didn't know, I really didn't know who this was, and I called him, and actually I got the number of, I think it was Camarão's, the son of Camarão. So Camarão was a famous piano accordionist. And I got on the phone with this guy. He had no idea who I was. And I just said, I'm here and I play accordion and I want to learn about the music. And he was like, oh, you have to go call Raminho, the son of Arlindo dos Oito Baixos. Sunday, we're all going to Arlindo's house for the Forró. And I expected it to be just like a couple of accordion players sitting around a table drinking cachaça. And I get there, and he's got like a club in his backyard with like a little stage. And it later grew into a bigger stage, but I got in there when it was still like kind of smaller and familiar. And it's in a neighborhood that was kind of far, Dois Unidos. And I got there, and that was like the center of this culture. And I'm in a way a total stranger, but totally welcomed in there. And I was just like in awe. Camarão was sitting there playing this music that up until then I'd only really heard on recordings. And that kind of, and it turns out that Arlindo is a button accordion player. So he plays this type of instrument that is a diatonic instrument. It has rows of buttons. There are no piano keys. Paddy knows all about it. We're going to talk about it. That's part of why we're here. And each row is a single diatonic key. And the instruments in the Northeast are tuned with two rows. One's in the key of C and one's in the key of B, which, if you don't know about music or the way scales work, all it means is that you can pretty much play any note that you can play on a piano. It's not limited in any way. And to sort of move this forward more quickly, today, I moved to Philadelphia. I had 20 years of playing this music. I never got good at the button style from the Northeast. I dabbled with it. Arlindo tuned one of my instruments for me, a button accordion, a honer, a black dot honer, and I played around with it. Never got really that good at it, but always loved it and always was passionate about it. And but in the back of my mind, I was like, I want to play Irish music, man, because I all through my 20s I'd listened to Irish music and I knew that there was a scene in New York, but I never found a way to connect with it. And I always loved it. And I came here and I had more time and space and energy, and was able to connect with some people here. And then Kate Spanos, who's here with us, connected me with Billy McComiskey, who's in Baltimore, who's one of the greatest musicians that I know in the world. and he's an hour and a half away from where I live, and I've been able to like take some lessons with Billy and get involved with his world. And between him and YouTube and colleagues and musicians here in Philly, my friend Hollis Payer is a fiddler that I work with all the time, and she's sort of a mentor to me. I've been able to get decent at the diatonic style in the Irish style, which it so happens is almost exactly the same as the Brazilian style, which is why there's this weird story now. The three of us, Kate and Paddy and I, are all interested in these two things. And I'll finish up with just one last thing about it. And I think it just has to do with the way in all these musics, the melodies create rhythm. They create like movement, and as opposed to like songs which tend to sort of sometimes float on top of the rhythm, the percussive element. These tunes just, you don't really even need anything. You just need the melody of the tune, and it makes you want to dance. They're all dance styles. So it all fits together between music, dance, the accordion, and culture. So that's a little bit of my story. So
that's amazing. Oh, well, we're definitely looking forward to hearing more. All right, Paddy League, how about you?
Sure. Well, Rob said it all. I don't know, what I have to add to that. He hit like on a lot of the really important points. Like, no, but I'm serious. I mean, I'm going to echo a lot of those things that you just said, Rob, just from my own perspective. So, growing up, I grew up in this, I suppose, transcultural, multilingual environment. And part of that was being exposed to a lot of, through my grandparents and their record collection, mostly, a lot of kind of, old school Irish dance music, like Cayley band music, these old, these records from my Irish family's from County Clare in the west of Ireland. And there's this grand tradition there of these big ensembles playing this really extremely rhythmic social dance music. And that's, I heard a lot of that as a kid and as a teenager when we moved to the Washington, D.C. area, had the really good fortune to really get a lot of experience playing in those kind of environments. It was really lively in the 90s when I was in the mid 90s when I was a teenager. There was a really lively Cayley dance scene between DC and Baltimore. And I was lucky as a kid, as a 13, 14, 15-year-old kid to be able to play at Cayley's with Billy McComiskey, with, all these amazing musicians of the DC Baltimore scene. Kate and I actually, I think we met at we were talking about this the other day. We probably met at some kind of dance festival or something.
Yeah, but I remember meeting you in Charlottesville.
Yeah, in the
at the
early
Prism
2000s,
Coffee
right?
House. And we were just talking, and we were like, wait, you're half Greek too? So it was like this funny, not many of us.
I know, right? But simultaneously, so I was in those situations, I was mostly playing drums and then some stringed instruments. But what Rob was saying about this music, Irish dance music, having these really dense melodies where the melodic information is also supplying all the rhythmic information, through phrasing and through the way tunes are structured. That kind of thing from childhood, from infancy, I guess, got into my brain and really felt like something that just made total sense. And, if you're a member of one of those diasporas, you really are, I think, like a grandchild or great-grandchild of like this 19th century social dance revolution, like the polka revolution, or, this like waltz hold, couple dancing, instrumental music tradition that really like caught on fire all over Europe and its colonies, and all these countries' diasporas, particularly in the 19th century. But at the same time, when I was a teenager in the DC area, that I was playing a lot of Irish music. I was also, as a drummer, playing a lot of, I guess for lack of a better, kind of American jazz and funk and, kind of instrumental popular music. And a lot of that, was kind of American style Brazilian jazz. So I had these ideas about, vaguely what samba was or bossa nova was, but I was always very unsatisfied with like my level of engagement with it. And I was always going to record stores and trying to find old records of Brazilian people playing. And I started to get really interested in history and the Portuguese language, and just figured my life took a different path. I wound up living in Greece for a while. But then I wound up getting married to a Brazilian woman. My wife is from Belo Horizonte in the Southeast. And I was telling these guys the other day, I think it was probably in 2004, 2005, I was living down there with her, and she said, and I'd been hearing all this Brazilian music, and like for the first time in my life, being in these social situations where Brazilian people in Brazil were playing samba, were playing choro, like Rob said, this mostly instrumental music. Again, really melodically dense, very, very interesting, very sophisticated stuff. Some other things, some Afro-Brazilian genres. And I was like, man, this stuff is so amazing. It's so beautiful. It's what a privilege to get to experience this. But none of it really like grabbed me like deep in here in a way that felt familiar, right? In a way that made me want to do it. Because I felt like maybe there was some reason or some connection. And then my wife one night was like, hey, you want to go out dancing? And I was like, yeah, sure. I'm great at dancing to Brazilian music, but I'm a good sport. So we went out and we went to this club where she was like, oh, it's Forró music. There's a DJ playing like old school Forró on LPs, stuff from the 70s. You're going to love it. I was like, all right, cool. I'm game. And we walked into this club, and the second, like we walked in off the street and I heard the sound, and it just hit me right in there. Because it was a recording of Dominguinhos, this accordion player from Garanhuns, Pernambuco, who Rob mentioned earlier. He's playing a shotty, like a schottish, right? Talk about like the polka, the polka revolution. Like it was, and it just sounded to me, I just immediately knew that it was a schottish. It was like this kind of hornpipey rhythm, this bouncy kind of to-do, but it was on the accordion. I could tell it was a piano accordion, but so much about it just, I don't know, I just feel like I recognized this maybe maudlin thread somewhere deep inside there. Maybe I'd had something to drink, I don't know. But I just immediately, I was like, this is something that I need in my life, because it makes, on some level, so much of it was alien and different to me, like what the percussion was doing, the harmonic stuff that was going on behind it. But something at its core just made so much sense to me on this level that I couldn't really rationalize, that I just felt. And it was the first time I had experienced that with something that wasn't Irish or Irish or Greek music. And even, I have to say, being a kid, a teenager playing a lot of drums, like playing jazz, like African-American popular music, I loved it. I could relate to it on a lot of levels, mostly like intellectual and political levels, but I always felt some kind of discomfort, especially when I started to get good at it and I was kind of representing some things as a musician. I was like, it's not really my, I don't know, it's hard to articulate, but not that I'm not saying that about Forró, but I felt like there was something in Forró that I could relate to on some deep kind of cultural and experiential level, without actually being Brazilian or without actually having experience with anything having to do with the life of the people who were making that music. But on a musical structural level, I felt like there was something encoded in there that made some kind of aesthetic and emotional sense to me. So that's how I got into it. And then I went off the deep end, man. I wound up, I was trying to, and this was 2004, right? And so I was trying to find as much stuff as I could, but I didn't really encounter that instrumental button accordion music that Rob was talking about until several years later, when I found a blog by this ethnomusicologist researcher who since has become a great friend of mine, Leo Ruggiero, who's a fantastic musician from Rio, who did his master's in ethnomusicology at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, about Zé Calixto, who later became one of my teachers. So I found this blog where he was posting all these videos and all this information about this instrument, and I freaked out and I started writing to him, and we started talking on the phone. And the next time I went to Brazil, we hung out a bunch. He took me to Zé Calixto's house, and it was just like this kind of transformative experience in my life. And I wound up meeting the whole Calixto family later in Paraíba and becoming really close friends and a mentee and student of Louis Zinu, the youngest in that family. So anyway,
that's incredible.
Yeah.
I got to say, for 30 years, people have been asking me how I got interested in Brazilian music, and I have never had the wherewithal to tell them that it's because I grew up listening to Irish music. But now I know. So, all right. So, Kate Spanos, tell us how you made this connection.
Yeah, I mean, first, I just want to say I'm so excited to have this group here together, and Bryan, to have you moderating. I've been having conversations with Rob and Paddy for a while. We've been wanting to do something, and this is kind of a kickoff to what will hopefully be some kind of artistic collaboration at some point. So this is awesome. But yeah, my entryway into Irish and Brazilian started, of course, with Irish. I was doing Irish dancing as a kid here in the DC area. My mom, who's Irish American, took me to Kaylee's out in Fairfax, and I immediately loved it. Like, I was not the kid that could do like the ballet, like stand there in first position and plie. I was like, no, I just want to hop around. Like, that was my thing, and I totally fell in love with it from the beginning. So I did that all through grade school, middle school, high school, college. And eventually I decided to go to the University of Limerick for their master's in traditional Irish dance performance program, knowing that it was the only program in the world to study Irish dance in an academic setting. And I knew that there was so much more that I wanted to learn. At the time, I was thinking that I wanted to be a TCRG, which is like the teacher certification for the Commission of Irish Dance organization. And so I was really into it. And I was also getting more into the music. Like, when I went to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, and Charlottesville just has this amazing traditional music scene that like really introduced me to the connections between the music and the dance. Paddy and I were joking the other day because he was saying he used to play at competitions in Northern Virginia, and he was like, we probably met each other. But in my head, I was like, yeah, I didn't even notice the musicians because there was no connection. Like, we just got on stage and we were nervous and we had our hairs in curls, and that was it. So Charlottesville like really opened up my eyes to like the culture, like bringing the music and the dance together. So that's why I ended up in Limerick. And Limerick was amazing. It opened up so much of other cultural dances to me. Catherine Foley, who was the course director there at the time, she recently retired. She's an ethnochoreologist, and so she introduced me to the whole field of dance ethnography and dance anthropology. And yes, Ken, Charlottesville is awesome. I try to go back every year around this time of year because it's beautiful. But yeah, this program was not just Irish dance. It was looking, first of all, at many different styles of Irish dance. So I had grown up doing step dance style and Kaylee dance, but I was introduced to sean-nós, which is from the west of Ireland, kind of old style dance, also festival style dance from Northern Ireland. And, so many opportunities to play with musicians. There were people playing flutes in the elevator. It was like fame, but for Irish music and dance, it was awesome. But we also did a lot of other cultural dance forms. So we did Greek dance, which was really cool. We did Breton dance. We did Appalachian clogging. We did tap dance, flamenco. And for the second semester, we were allowed to choose any elective that we wanted. And I had read in some reading that had been assigned to me about a modern dance choreographer, I think it was Laurie Booth, who had used capoeira, the Brazilian martial art, for his inspiration. And I was like, that's a weird word, like capoeira, maybe I'll look into that. And so I asked Catherine Foley, hey, is there any way that I could do capoeira for my elective? And she was like, well, try to find somebody here in Limerick and we'll see who we can get. And Mestre Piau was living in Limerick. She connected me with him. We did solo classes, which anybody that knows capoeira was like, this was my introduction to capoeira. It was just me and the teacher who's like teaching me to play berimbau and pandero and like the movements. But like, I didn't see a roda for 6 months. Like, I didn't experience the roda, like the circle, the actual like interacting with various people and feeling that ashe, like that energy, until I ended up going to one of his real classes in the city, right? I was doing like solo classes for like 6 months. But I totally fell in love with capoeira. And the thing that I found most challenging about it was, of course, I had spent my whole life in this vertical alignment, you know, arms at the sides, stoic face, like, and doing choreography, right? Everything memorized. Capoeira was all of a sudden 3D, inverted, you know, everything had to be like quick, like you had to react and interact with the person you were playing with. You also had to learn the instruments. Again, like you couldn't be a capoeirista without learning the music, right? And learning that whole history. Whereas I got away for years with Irish dance, only knowing dance, right? And I fell in love with like that whole package, and that got me really interested in Brazilian culture. But that was really the tip. I would say I'm still at the tip, but I'm a little bit, you know, further in now. But I came back to the US. I totally got obsessed with capoeira. I was going like 6 days a week. But I ended up at the University of Maryland for my PhD program and got really, really interested in the connections between Irish or European more generally and African culture, the encounters between those cultures in the Americas. So I was looking at tap and, you know, Irish American and African American kind of in the cities, especially in New York, 5 points, like developing these common dance forms, also like flat footing, Appalachian clogging. And I ended up on the island of Montserrat, which is for another topic, for another discussion, but opened my eyes in a lot of ways to more of these possible connections between Irish and African cultures. And I like to say actually encounters rather than connections, because many times, especially from what I've seen in Montserrat, it's often in conflict, right? So it's not always a connection. There's actually like a disconnect. But yeah, when I finished my dissertation, I ended up applying for a Fulbright postdoc grant to go to Recife to study frevo. I chose frevo because actually it was Pablo's dad, Floriano, who said to me, you know, like your ginga with capoeira like is a little like stiff. Like you might want to try frevo because it's very bouncy and it has a lot of footwork. Like you might like that better. So I checked it out and I was like, oh my God, frevo looks like so much fun. I don't know about the squats and the jumps, but no, I can do the jumps, not the splits, but I can do the jumps. But the squats, I was like, that looks impossible. But it seemed a little more up my alley. The more research that I did about frevo, though, I was like, I didn't know that it had origins in capoeira, because on the surface, it just looks happy and joyous and colorful, and like people are just having a great time. And the narrative that I know about capoeira, of course, is rooted in this narrative of enslaved Africans in Brazil, right? It's always a very like serious history. Of course, capoeiristas take it very seriously. All of the songs are about this period of history and about this identity. Frevo to me just seemed like fun. And so I was like, where is this connection? Like, why does it look like one thing on the surface, and what is there to understand underneath that surface? And so that's what I was there in Recife to study. But it also opened up my eyes to like the full, I like to say, constellation of popular music and dance in Recife. And, you know, I loved what, Paddy, you said about like feeling something when you heard the music. When I heard Cavalo Marinho, which is a rural form from Pernambuco, I really like felt something. It felt very familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. I was seeing things, and I have a video that maybe we can show later, but I was seeing things that looked really familiar, hearing things that sounded really familiar. But when I saw it, I was also like, there's so much there that I don't understand. And I was able to take some classes with an amazing teacher who is from Condado, which is one of the cities known for Cavalo Marinho. So yeah, I mean, for me, the connections, I'm not so much looking for explicit connections in my scholarly research or anything between Brazilian and Irish, but I'm really interested in this kind of accumulation of embodied knowledges over time, and how like I've changed by starting with Irish dance and then learning like capoeira and then frevo, and it's embodied, but it has also changed like my mental state in a lot of ways. And I just really appreciate that in my life. You know, it's really been an important development. So I'm really, you know, I'm interested in continuing and, you know, learning more. So like I said, I think I'm still on that tip of the iceberg, but, you know, getting deeper in.
Wow, that's fantastic. So you mentioned a video that you have on Cavallo Marinho, and I think the audience members would love to see some of these clips. You talked a little bit about Limerick. I know we have some folks from Limerick in the audience, so that's great. And we're seeing some comments and questions come in from people in the audience. So I want to encourage people in the audience to go ahead and post your comments and questions in chat. But yeah, let's go to one of the videos. Kate, do you want to start off with that video on Cavallo Marinho?
Sure, yeah. While Pablo is kind of searching for it, I know that sometimes it's hard to find these things. I'll give a little bit of an introduction. So this is actually not my video. This video was created a few years ago. I think it was in 2014. And it's a DVD of a full or an almost full performance of a Cavallo Marinho performance by Estrela de Ouro, which is a Cavallo Marinho group in Condado, Pernambuco. And it's only I only took some clips from the very beginning, so you only see kind of the entrance of the dancers. They're kind of wearing normal street clothes, but later on, you would see that they come out in these masks and these amazing costumes. And Cavallo Marinho is not a dance, not a music, not just one thing. It's like storytelling. There's a lot of improvisational kind of joking and poetry and rhyme and things like that. And the music and the dance like tell a story, and they come very much together. There's a lot about it that I don't understand, but the lead dancer you'll see in this video is Fabinho Soares, who was my teacher in Recife. And he just, the way that he taught dance was like no other experience I've ever had. Pablo was with me. We would go into the class early and he'd be there, and he would just talk about like where this dance comes from, what it means for, what does it mean for government recognition of these dances? What does it do to these dances? So how are they able to maintain their agency and their ownership over the dances or not? And he really like made us feel kind of the urgency. We would go into class and he'd say, okay, vai morrer, you're gonna die. Like this is like the feeling that we had. And we'd learn like maybe 5 steps over 5 months, but it was so hard. Like if you look at it from somebody who does footwork all the time, you're like, oh yeah, I could do that footwork. It looks to me almost like a combination of Appalachian flat footing and house dance, and like there are all these things kind of combined. But it's so hard to do the posture that the way he wanted us to do it, and to kind of dig into the ground the way he wanted us to, and to feel the bottoms of your feet. It was just like, it was so hard. I was exhausted. So maybe you'll see a little bit of this. But Fabinho was just doing a conversation the other day, I think it was Tuesday, and he was reiterating this idea, o corpo é tudo, the body's everything, and that's where all of the knowledge is. So when I say embodied knowledge, it's really about, we're these scholars that come in and write about it, and as a dance scholar, I do my best to put words to these things, but I also recognize that there's so much that's just in the body. And so I hope you'll see in the clip that there's so much in like the postures and the slight lean in one direction. So I'll just let Pablo pull it up.
All right, great. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Wow.
Amazing. Cavallo Marinho.
It's awesome. And that second part when they're in the circle and they're grabbing each other, the mergulhão, like when we learn that, it looks, I mean, it already looks kind of frantic, right? Like there's a lot going on. But in capoeira, for example, you'd have two people go in and like play a game for a little while. And like, you know, in capoeira, you might say cook your opponent, like kind of like play a little bit, you know, get into it. But this is like you go in and grab somebody and then that person immediately has to choose the next person to grab. So you don't even like get to say hi. You're already having to think about the next person. It was like, it's way harder than it looks.
It looks pretty hard, actually. Yeah. I'm not about to get in there. Yeah. All right. So, Rob, I think you've got a clip for us as well.
Yeah, maybe we could play my music video that I made. So
that sounds like a great idea. Yeah. Tell us what it's all about.
So I wrote this tune. I'm a composer. Composing is kind of like a place for me to kind of explore these different influences and see how they come out. So often I'll just sort of start with like a starting point. I mean, sometimes I'm like, I'm really going to write a certain type. I'm going to write a choro. I'm going to write a forró. I'm going to write an Irish jig. And I try really hard to like write something that stays within the bounds of that genre. But then other times I'll just be like, okay, I'm going to just try and let me try and write a jig. And then something happens and it kind of, some other influence comes in and it just turns into this thing that it doesn't necessarily even have a name. So I call this Jack's jig, but you wouldn't really say that it's a jig in the same way that Garrett Barry's jig is a jig, or or some of the Irish tunes that I know. So this tune I wrote here in Philly, but I usually, I'll get at some point in the process I'll get inspired to give the tune a title. Being instrumental music, I can kind of name it whatever I want. And my wife Jennifer and I had been to Ireland just a little bit before I wrote this tune, and we went to a sheepdog demonstration with this dog Jack, who we at this place Atlantic Sheepdogs in County Sligo on the water. And we met Jack, who's like this amazingly talented sheepdog that is like three-time All Ireland champion, and very impressed by the dog. The dogs understand. It's not that they only understand like a generic whistle. They understand signals that are specifically for them, and not for some other dog. So anyway, the whole thing was very impressive, and I ended up writing this tune and calling it Jack's Jig. And then later, I made this music video during the pandemic. So that's what this video is of, and you can just get a sense of my composing and how it's influenced by different things. There are syncopations in there that you probably wouldn't hear in a traditional Irish jig, that come out of my experience with Brazilian music, as well as just jazz. I mean, I grew up. I'm not I'm neither Irish American nor Greek American. I'm Italian American. So I'm sort of the odd person out here, but grew up in a family with my dad who played in New York during the swing era and afterwards as a jazz saxophonist. So that was sort of like my basis of everything from the beginning. So and I think all that stuff came together for me in Brazilian music. Brought a lot of things together, like the European and the African, and it all just kind of like comes together in a very unique way. Anyway, we can check out the video. And
well, Rob, you're Sicilian American, right?
I'm half Sicilian.
Okay, well, we'll claim that part as Greek anyways.
Right. That's true. That's true. Actually, my family is from Agrigento, which is there are very famous Greek temples there.
Sure.
So the Greeks were there. The Greeks were some of the first people there.
Yeah.
So okay, I'm an honorary Greek.
for the in the context of Brazilian music, at least.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, great. So Well done, Rob, and well done, Jack. Yeah,
That's a great tune, Rob.
it really
Nice.
is.
I was dancing over here
Congratulations. Yeah,
quietly.
and we adopted some COVID puppies back at the beginning of shutdown in March, and now I realize that they've got some Irish sheepdog in them.
Okay.
So, yeah, we'll see if we can
Those
start
are
training
all
them.
images from the west coast of Ireland. There's County Kerry. We went to the Great Blasket Island, and I used those seals on the water.
Yeah.
I think they're gray seals. Those are from the Great Blasket, and also Sligo. There's a little bit of County Clare and Galway in there, and amazingly beautiful. One of the most beautiful places that I've ever been to. So
Beautiful, the home country. So, Paddy,
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit more about the button accordion and this tuning that northeastern Brazil and Ireland have in common?
Sure. Yeah. So I saw that someone, Carlos Goulart, mentioned in the comments something about Southern Brazilian music, which, and I'm going to assume that Carlos was saying that because in the extreme south of Brazil, Rio Grande do Sul and other places, there's a very, very strong accordion tradition, a diatonic accordion tradition, which is a direct result of the huge amounts of Italian, particularly, and also German migration to that part of the country. The instrument that they play there, even though it looks similar to the instrument that we're talking about in northeastern Brazil, is essentially a completely different instrument, and they're not really interchangeable. So the instrument that is played in the Northeast, like this instrument right here. Actually, this is pretty much the same instrument that a lot of Irish musicians play, because as I was explaining to the guys before, this is kind of like the gold standard of, at least, I mean, it certainly was a generation ago, and a lot of young players like this sound in this field too, the gold standard of traditional Irish button accordions. It's a Paolo Soprani, this Italian-made accordion. It's a very particular feel and sound. Billy McConaughey, another shout out to Billy McConaughey, one of the great living treasures of the world in terms of music and just being a person. He plays an old Paolo Soprani box. So the similarity, as Rob alluded to, is that both in Ireland, the dominant system in Ireland and the dominant system in northeastern Brazil are almost identical. And that's one of the things that first, when I was mentioning before that I was learning this stuff from Leo Ruggiero in his blog when he was logging kind of his research. He mentioned this. He was like, "Oh, this is the tuning," and I noticed I've learned something that in Ireland they play a similar system, and it blew my mind because up to then I had known, I mean, being a fairly nerdy person and interested in accordions, there are about a dozen or so dominant tuning systems, but that are used nowadays, but almost all of them are truly, in terms of the relationship between the two rows, or sometimes three rows, it's a diatonic system, meaning that everything is related in terms of like functional European harmony. So you would have like a row in the key of C, and then a row in a related key like F or G or something like that. The intention being to be able to play chords and melodic runs that make sense in the key of a song you're playing. But the Irish system, which was developed around the turn of the 20th century by the Scottish brothers, and was quite popular throughout Scotland and Northern England, and to a much smaller extent Ireland, pioneered this kind of half-step model. So like Rob was saying, there's one row in the key of C, for example, and then the next row is in the key of B, so just right below it. which means that you can play any note. You can play a chromatic scale, right? You know. Now, what that does, practically speaking, for this really dense instrumental dance music means that you can play in any key, but more importantly, you can play a lot of these really dense clusters of melodies without really shifting hand position, and you can play accidental notes, and you can develop a lot of different musical ideas in this really compact system. So what I find very curious is that this system, even though it's the dominant system both in the northeast of Brazil and in Ireland, didn't really become the standard in Ireland until the middle of the 20th century. There were some boxes, presumably in the 1920s, for example, in Ireland in circulation playing traditional music on this, but for whatever reason, it didn't catch on. But it's very clear from the research of a number of people in Brazil, you know, people taking oral histories and doing archival work, that this system, the dominant system in northeastern Brazil, has been the dominant system for more than a century. And so that immediately tells us that it did not come, it's not like Irish people playing traditional Irish music brought it to northeastern Brazil. Although there is a historical connection between the two places in terms of population movements, because from about 1885 or something until 1910, 1915, I can't remember the exact dates, the Brazilian, there was a British company that got a contract from the Brazilian government to build the railroad infrastructure throughout the Northeast, and brought thousands and thousands of guest workers over from Northern England. A lot of those people were certainly Irish, working in some of the urban centers of England. Certainly they would have brought their music with them.
Yeah, and there's a great old forró about that railroad line in Bahia. Estrada de Ferro Central do Brasil, Central da Bahia.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll say, I don't think it's a fanciful thing. I do think, I mean, there is a current of oral, of you know, a folklore or of a kind of oral tradition about this connection. For example, when I first met Luizinho Calixto, this great musician, we'll see a video of him playing in a minute. I went up to Paraíba and I wound up finding him and his son at some event they were playing at. And I introduced him and I said, "Oh, I'm a friend of so-and-so, and I wanted to come meet you." And he looked at me, he was like, "What?" He said, "Why are you interested? Like, what are you doing here? Like, why is this compelling to you? Why?" And I started to give like the condensed version of the speech I gave to you all at the beginning. Like, well, I grew up around Greek and Irish music. And as soon as I said Irish music, he said, "Ah, okay, I got it. Totally cool. I understand why you're interested." Because, and so he himself, from things he had heard and connections he had made independently from being a very worldly, sophisticated musician, had noticed these same connections on a much deeper level than I had. Actually, I learned later. So I would like us to look at this video, the one that I called Cakewalk, because I think if you're familiar with Irish music, so this is a video of Luizinho Calixto, my principal teacher and collaborator in my research, playing an old Hohner accordion, restored old Hohner instrument from around the turn of the 20th century. Pretty much the same kind of instrument that presumably people would have been bringing over. This instrument would have been certainly top of the line at that point. And he's playing a tune that he learned from his father, João de Deus Calixto, Céu de Deus, as he's known in the folklore of Paraíba. If anybody's familiar with Luís Gonzaga, the great accordion player, Luís Gonzaga's father, who was a button accordion player, was a contemporary and friend of Céu de Deus, Luizinho's father. So Céu de Deus would have been really active in the first, like from, let's say, 1910 to 1915 maybe, to 1950 was when he would have been playing a lot. He died in the early 70s at a very, very, very ripe old age. But this is one of the, according to Luizinho and his brother Zé, this was one of like the oldest tunes in his repertoire. And if you listen to it, if you're familiar with Irish music, those of you who are listening, and you think about something like an really old style, like Irish American, like vaudeville type of barn dance or schottish, or maybe a simple hornpipe, this will sound familiar to you. If you're familiar with American music hall repertoire, I encourage you to think about this as like a cakewalk, like the kind of this, which is this song and dance and instrumental music form that grew out of African American dance and music traditions, was a staple of the horrifying minstrel tradition, and also became a staple of the Irish American and other like ethnic transitioning to white vaudeville performers of that era. So this tune to me sounds, it sounds like kind of a missing link. That's a little fanciful on my part, but it really has a lot of those, like I could transcribe it and notate things and say, oh, this reminds me of this tune recorded by so-and-so, John Kimmel in the, 20s in New York. These kind of like substructural things I think really are some kind of evidence, but also it gives me that feeling, in here. And I think that's just as important. And, this is a recording that I made on my iPhone this past summer or a couple summers ago in somebody's kitchen. But I do still think it's something significant. And most importantly, it's just like really great, beautiful music. So maybe we could hear that, this unknown cakewalk.
All right.
Hey, there's David. I'm gonna say hi to David. David's watching us from Ireland.
All right.
Very nice. All right.
Can I ask a question? I have a quick question for Paddy. So this is
Sure.
So just to get at the heart of this real quick, two related questions. Is the implication that the BC system in Brazil was possibly created by someone in Brazil independently of the Scottish original BC British chromatic system that we know about? And did Luis Gonzaga's father play a BC, what is essentially a BC box, either exactly the same or similar to the modern style that you play and that we know about?
No and yes. What I think, my educated guess, and again, okay. I have an idea of like how this research could actually be done, but it involves a lot of like, ship manifests and all kinds of that kind of thing. I'm pretty sure the only plausible explanation I can think of is that because this system, some kind of half-step system, was very popular among exactly the kind of population that would have been the people who would have signed up or, who would have been coerced to like go to Brazil to work on the railroads. I can only assume that they were bringing those instruments. And because that half-step system did not catch on in Ireland until like 60 years later or something. So, it just doesn't make any sense. And yeah, Januário played a half-step box as far as I know. I'm pretty sure he did. Pretty much all those guys of that generation, if they were from that area, they did. There were some people, like, for example, the great composer Hermeto Pascoal, for example, from a different region of the Northeast. He and his family, his father, they play diatonic boxes, not the half-step system.
Right.
Yeah, and then there's another, in some parts of the state of Ceará, there's actually this little pocket, I can't remember exactly where, it's not in Crato, it's somewhere else, where they play a half-step system, but the rows are reversed. So it's like a B row on the inside and a C row on the outside, which like shouldn't make any difference, but you get stuck in some kind of thing. But I do think, the other piece that's very interesting that we haven't talked about, that is very different in the Brazilian case from the Irish case, is that along with being players of the instrument, passed down through, patrilineal, from father to son, until the last generation, if you were an accordion player, you also tuned accordions and repaired them. And that was a very important thing to get, not just to keep the instrument in tune, but there was every little region had a very specific way of tuning the reeds, so that like the kind of, as we say, the wetness, the relative wetness of the, how in tune the individual, because there's 2 or 3 reeds sounding at the same time when you play a button. And that's something that's almost completely disappeared in Brazil, just because people don't have to do that anymore. But back in the day, certainly when people didn't necessarily have electricity, didn't have access to power tools, and certainly didn't have money to like buy a new instrument, being able to take those tiny metal reeds and tune them, not just to keep the instrument in tune, which you have to do if you play it all the time, but also to get exactly the sound that was characteristic of your family and your region. Right. That used to be a huge part of what it meant to be an accordion player, and that has almost completely disappeared. I mean, as Arlindo, actually, I never met him, but as I've heard, he used to always say, or no, actually, it wasn't Arlindo, it was somebody else used to say, playing the fole de oito baixos, this instrument, the 8-bass button accordion, it's life. It's a way of life, or it used to be. It's not just being a musician. It's not playing an instrument. It's somebody back in the day who played this fulfilled a whole bunch of different roles in their communities. They usually knew how to work with metal. They knew how to repair things like sewing machines and the watches and that kind of stuff. So
that's one thing that I wanted to say, make sure that I say before we like finish this up, was just the way in which like there's a quality of intimacy in all of this music. And like when Kate was playing that video of the Cavalo Marinho, that's a community of people, and that's what they do. That's part of their identity as like friends and family and community, people who live together. And that's something that really surprised me in Brazil, the way in which like a style of music comes from a place. So you've got the coco de Arco Verde comes from Arco Verde, or another kind of coco comes from this place and these people who do that thing. They're not disembodied from the people. The music isn't disembodied from the people. And I think that like you now I'm starting to see that in Irish music too, the way in which you'll have like a session that's been happening every Tuesday night in that town for 20 years. And those people are family, and they know the same body of tunes together, and they play some, each one's got like kind of their favorites or tunes that they've written. And I think that also that's reflected in the way this music is. A lot of the same material is just getting like reworked over and over again. It's not like, I'm going to write a hit and Luis Gonzaga did that. But the basis of it is this music that comes out of communities, comes out of friendship. It's kind of a beautiful thing. I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that, and the way in which this sort of detailed orientation of, the way these melodies are like complex. I think that that's a reflection of that, of intimacy and like living the music. The music's part of like who you are as a person. And for me, there's that whole thing of like, much of my music making is in relation to these communities that I'm not actually even like really part of in a way. Even with jazz, like I didn't grow up in the bebop community. I mean, I went to Barry Harris's workshops, so I kind of was able to, or my dad grew up playing jazz gigs, but just the privilege of being able to be present and accepted in that world is something that is unique, and it feeds me a lot. And I'm sure that you both, like all of us here, have kind of had that experience. So just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. That really brings us back to this concept of embodied knowledge that Kate was talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. And at the same time that it's deeply rooted in communities, it also allows for the kind of encounter that we've been talking about. And we do have one really great example of that in Kate's own work. So Kate, can you show us the clip where you bring together some Irish and Brazilian styles?
Yeah, I'll give a little bit of an introduction. So this, I wouldn't call this work exactly. This is more play. The pandemic has actually been a really good time for play. Like, I never had time, or I guess the mental space to kind of play around. And I started out almost immediately when the pandemic hit, just like playing around with stuff and feeling much more open to improvisation, which, by the way, I've always been terrified of, even though I've been like working on it for a while. It's always been scary because I was trained in like, okay, you do your jig, your hornpipe, slip jig, and your reel, and then your set dance, and that's your dance for the year. Like that's your repertoire for the year. And then, starting to do these other dances, like, oh, I have to like make things up on the spot. This is scary, So the pandemic has been a great time to kind of open up space for that kind of thing, and recording myself and just playing around with it. So this is actually a video that I made a couple weeks ago, just playing around with some ideas. I've been taking classes online with Otávio Bastos, who created a program for learning frevo, not just the dance, but everything about frevo, on Saturdays. It's called Mexe Flix, and he uses his method, which he calls Mexe com tudo. And it's like going into his Sifi through Zoom every Saturday morning. It's really just a wonderful experience. And what he's really doing in that class is breaking down these kind of European or Western aesthetics about what is beauty, what is to be expected, that we're kind of trained to think that dance is supposed to be upright and, like for an Irish dancer, right? Like very vertical, like very rigid. But he's using frevo to demonstrate other possibilities for expressing oneself. And it's really rooted in the carnival tradition, the street carnival tradition. So people getting out onto the streets. We don't have this right now, but people shoulder to shoulder, sweating, like drinking, like pushing each other, elbowing each other, just this really wild kind of carnival feeling. And it's not so much about looking beautiful, but it's more about expressing yourself and getting that tension out, right? And he traces it back to the abolition of slavery in Brazil. Frevo appeared shortly after that time in his Sifi. And now he's like, what's going to happen after the pandemic when we go out and we can, dance in the streets again? It's going to be a similar feeling of liberation. So yeah, I mean, I was playing around with these ideas. I thought that I would choose two songs that actually are not instrumental. They're lilting, basically. So I chose a lilting Irish reel, and then another tune called Cabelo de Fogo, which is a famous frevo song performed by Orquestra da Bomba do Emeterio. And so, Pablo, you can put the little caption up there so people can see the name of the artist. But yeah, it's a short little clip. It was just for play, just for fun.
Beautiful.
So just for fun. But I did, actually, I kind of have a question for Rob and Paddy too, because I've been really interested as a percussive dancer for a long time in the ways that Irish dancers train to basically dance the melody, like dance the tune. And a lot of like when we think of percussion, it's often like on the bass beat or whatever. And I've always thought it was really interesting when I learned like a traditional set dance like the Blackbird, like when you sing the steps, you sing it in the tune. And then when you dance even without music, you can hear that tune. And I remember that early on, actually, Pablo and I were working together on some kind of samba jig. Those of you that are watching and know samba jig, our famous brand. We were working on some kind of pandero, like Irish dance kind of collaboration. And Pablo was kind of like, "You're making so much noise, like you're filling in all the space and the silences." I was like, "I know, this is like an Irish dancing, we don't do that." There's a little bit of that in Sean-Nós, but like step dance feels very like frenetic. It's kind of similar to frevo in that way, like you just keep going. But for me, the big difference between when I listen to Irish music and Brazilian music is that Brazilian music has that strong like percussion. Like in Forró, there's the zabumba, right? Like it's really strong in the background. And Irish music will have the bowron, right? But it's not quite the same. And so I'm just wondering, I always think of things, Paddy, you were saying there's like you would like transcribe something and know all the little details, but there's also that feeling. And for me as a dancer, it's always been more about that feeling. But I'm wondering if you two have anything to say about that kind of percussive melody versus like percussive, like, keeping the beat kind of thing.
I mean, Paddy, do you have a thought? I mean, I have sort of a thought about it as well.
Yeah, you want to go first?
Sure. Okay. So for me, in Brazilian music, at least, I feel like there are layers, and there's like a conversation going on. So you do have this pulse. You do have this like, dum, 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 but even that pulse, like in a forró, there's variation kind of at the ends of the phrases, and that relates to the melody. Then you've got the triangle, and the triangle is just ding it, ding it, ding it. So there's not a lot there that's sort of necessarily following the melody. But then you'll have like the pandero, or you'll have other instruments that are kind of in a conversation, and they are improvisational, and they are kind of like relating to the melody. And the melody is like percussion too, so that's like a typical maybe rhythm of like a button accordion tune. So I'm not necessarily really answering the question, except that I think that there's, in Brazilian music at least, there's both. There are layers.
Yeah.
There is that sense of like repetition and this thing that keeps, that's sort of like in your heart the whole time. And then there's also this conversation going on that's responding to the melody. So that's kind of how I understand it in the Brazilian context.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree. And then, there's Brazilian music and Brazilian music and Brazilian music and Brazilian music and Brazilian music, but thinking about Forró, for example, or northeastern dance music, I mean, I think we also tend to, it depends on what we're talking about. If we're talking about like now, the way we think about it now, the way most people experience it now, or how farther back in history we want to go, and for what reasons, right? But the kind of what we tend to think about is Forró now, this like, couple dance music, which is all this stuff that, well, not everything, but the stuff that Rob and I have been talking about, at least, grew out of at least two very separate streams of music. I mean, there's like the stuff that really, I believe, has a connection to the music of Ireland and the British Isles and France and Western Europe, like I said, all this polka revolution music, which is also, we should also totally mention, has really clear kinship with a lot of Caribbean social dance music, like all the compas dance music throughout this French-speaking Caribbean. There's a lot of related dance forms in Puerto Rico, for example, and the Spanish-speaking Caribbean. American, like Southern square dance music, contra dance music, a lot of Western American social dance music. All these things are children of the polka revolution. There's a great book by Charlie Kyle, Keil, called, I think maybe it's just called Polka exclamation point or something like that, or I can't remember, but the title, but it's about all this. It's a really great work of historiography about that whole thing. There's that. And then in northeastern Brazil, there's this other stream of music that blended together with that accordion based music, which is the kind of baião genre with, which was music on the rabeca, the fiddle, the same instrument that was in the cavalo marinho thing, and on the pífano, the flute, with zabumba, the bass drum, and triangle. Whereas the accordion music, at least in, up until the middle part of the century, really up until Luis Gonzaga, when it had percussive accompaniment, which according to like the interviews I've done with old timers, it didn't all the time. It was, at the most, it was a pandeiro in certain places, or it was mele, which was a kind of, I don't know if you guys know the mele. It's kind of like nobody plays it anymore. It's kind of like this single-headed drum played with a, like a boom, 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 boom. It's kind of like a surdo, but that doesn't really resonate a lot. So like, for example, somebody asked, is there like a family sound analogy, like in Irish music? There certainly used to be. Nowadays, because, I hope, maybe people are getting the impression that the button accordion is like super popular in northeastern Brazil. It is not. There are, it has, some friends of mine, some researchers in Paraíba and Pernambuco did a project recently trying to find every single living player of the instrument who can really play in the state of Paraíba, and they rounded up like 50 people, and they were amazed that there were that many. So if you extrapolate, there's a couple hundred people throughout the northeast of Brazil who really can play, but almost all of them are over the age of 50. And most of them are quite old. In terms of families that have an active tradition, I can only think of really one, which is the Callisto family, the guys who I work with, where like there is no break in the generations, and young people are playing. They're at least playing the instrument, not as professionals, but they're still playing. And there is a recognizable, talking about embodied knowledge, there is really, like, for example, a Callisto family way of holding the instrument, way of, way of just relating to the instrument exactly how, and I have my instrument set up in that way, with the straps the exact same way, the buttons spaced exactly the same way, with this little wooden thing that they all put on it. You play with your thumb behind the instrument in this very particular fashion. You use your pinky finger, which is very unusual for Brazilian button accordionists. You hold everything is like very analytic. Like my teacher, Luizinho, he's like, no, you're holding your shoulder wrong. No, you got to put your elbow at this angle. No, when you so in this tuning, for example, there's two pitches, the E natural and the B natural, that are repeated, like they exist on both rows. And he's very specific. He can hear, like he's in his kitchen and I'm like playing through a tune that he just taught me. He's like making coffee and like banging stuff. And he's like, no, you're playing the wrong E. And I'm like, how can you tell? How can you tell? He's like, I can tell. I know that instrument. It's like tuned slightly differently. Or I can tell I can hear the bellows that you're playing the E on the push when you're supposed to be playing on the pull. And I'm like, why is that important? He's like, because that's how we do it in our family. That's how we get our sound. And if you want to play like me, you're going to play it. You're going to play that E. Don't play the other E. So there is that kind of thing. And it used to be, I'm extrapolating by saying it used to be pretty widespread, I'm guessing. But because this instrument is not the preferred accordion. Now, piano accordions, you can't throw a stick in northeastern Brazil without hitting a 10-year-old kid who is playing insane piano accordion music. Like, there are thousands of people playing the piano accordion in northeastern Brazil at a level that is just like, it's crazy, because there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of them is that tastes have changed. People want to dance to music with word. They want to dance to songs. They don't want to dance to instrumental music. They don't want to consume instrumental music as much anymore. And Brazilian audiences are, they're used to also much, because of the influence of MPB, Brazilian popular music, choro, all these kind of like mixings of things. They're used to very dense, complex harmonies, for example, on the accordion, which you cannot do on the button accordion. It's a purely melodic instrument. There's bass buttons, but half the time either the people don't play them or you can't hear them anyway. So it's it's a very complex kind of thing. And just to answer the other question, it is the same, like in the South, it's the same instrument in that it's a 2-row button accordion. And like I could take this instrument and give it to a Southern accordionist, but they wouldn't be able to play anything on it. They would have to like take it to somebody and have it retuned. But the instrument itself is the same, but the tuning is completely different and it doesn't translate. So I talked a lot right there, but you know.
But it's great.
I'm an ethnomusicologist.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm a musicologist. I reject the title
Paddy.
ethnomusicologist, but
I'll just text Paddy on like a Saturday afternoon about this stuff, asking him questions. I'm like, what's the, how do you play this tune on that? It's crazy.
Well, and it's so interesting. I'm always thinking about like the different ways that dancers think about music versus how musicians think about it, and I think I was telling Paddy this the other day, but the ways that dancers count is very different from musicians. Like musicians maybe would count in like, whatever is notated, or I assume, I don't know, but we count based on like a slip jig would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it's a 9, 8. And so I'm just always fascinated by like the different ways that we kind of mentally compartmentalize these things and kind of, I guess, manifest them, in our bodies, whether we're playing an instrument or playing, just moving. But yeah.
All right. So it has been such a pleasure to have all of us here together tonight to think about these encounters and the encounters between Brazil and Ireland, a little bit of Greece thrown in, a little bit of Sicily. I feel like we maybe are not giving enough to Ireland here, so we need a little more Irish music before we go out, definitely. And I think that Rob has some for us, right? So is that the Trio Julio or?
No, Maggie's Boots, I think we're going to play next.
So we're going to hear Maggie's Boots. All right, great.
All right.
I miss sessions. Oh my gosh.
Oh, I know, right?
Yeah.
The trance that you get into, it's just like,
Yeah.
it's beautiful.
Great tune.
Beautiful. Yeah,
Great playing, Rob.
congratulations. That's really wonderful. Yeah.
I'm getting there. Yeah.
I imagine we're about to wrap up, but I want to say something, if it's okay, that I think is very important about instrumental forró, but particularly like this instrument right now in the Northeast, and particularly the state of Paraíba. Those of you who know, and this does relate actually to Irish music or ideas about Irish music and the transnational character of this popular music in an important way. Those of you who know like Brazil and Brazilian society and history know that in the Brazilian context, the word northeastern or northeasterner, like as a person, it's a racial term, right? It is a racialized term that means, I mean, very frequently, especially when deployed by people from the South in particular context, has a lot of, occasionally pejorative undertones and overtones. And it generally means these kind of in-between people who have been lost in the shuffle of Brazil's particular complex notion of what it means to have a racial identity, and also lost in the shuffle of a lot of the socioeconomic things that have happened over the last, certainly over the last century. So this instrument has started to become, really over the last couple of years, a real symbol for a political symbol and a symbol of empowerment, cultural empowerment, and taking back some agency in terms of defining people, particularly in the state of Paraíba, in a relatively, admittedly small social group, but one that is picking up a lot of steam and doing a lot of really amazing things artistically and politically. And what interests me is that consciousness about and kind of discourse about the connections with other music traditions and cultural traditions that fall outside of this traditional tripartite Brazilian, racial democracy paradigm of like the white European and the Black African and the indigenous people all harmoniously mixing together to produce the master Brazilian race kind of thing. Musicians and people in the Northeast who are involved with the music of this instrument are very conscious of the connections, the very real connections with other places in the world, and much more complex and more nuanced historical processes that go into their own localized heritage than there is room for in those kind of traditional passed down through the Brazilian government and media discourses. And this, like I said, this instrument is becoming more and more central to that, to consciousness about real connections with musicians and artists and political movements in other parts of the world. It's very exciting. And I just wanted to, I think a lot of the people who are my friends and collaborators down there, if they were in this call, they would want that to be said. So
yeah, and I think that's what's so fascinating. Like I said earlier, I was interested in frevo because it seemed just like a happy, this is just a dance, on the surface. Like all of this sounds like dance music. It is dance music, right? But it's also about resistance and protest and identity and all these things that are really important to people and communities. And it's not only in Brazil, it's also in Ireland, remembering the Gaelic League and how all of this was a part of like a quest to form a national identity that was particularly Irish. And so, I think it's really important to keep in mind, like, we're happy and we're dancing and it sounds great, but also remembering like where this comes from and the people and what they're trying to communicate through the music.
Yeah, totally.
And the dance. And the dance.
And the dance. Don't forget the dance.
And I mean, this music that the music we've been talking about pretty much is, I mean, it would not exist and certainly wouldn't be what it is without the dance. And this is all dance music. It's all bringing people together, social dance music.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks to our three wonderful performers, Rob Curto, Paddy League, and Kate Spanos. I'll give you just a moment if you want to promote anything that you have coming up or tell us anything about any of your current ventures. Go ahead, Rob.
What am I doing? I can't think off the top of my head what's next, but there'll be more, more live stream concerts and whatnot, and continuing to kind of work on music here.
And you're teaching lessons, right? You're offering
Yeah,
lessons and doing some workshops with Educarte.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, we're working on. I have a kind of a workshop about Luis Gonzaga and about his life that kind of touches a little bit on some of these issues of the ideas about the Northeast and the experience of the people from the Northeast. And I don't think we've settled on a date yet, but we're working on doing a kind of remote online version of that workshop where I'm going to play accordion, I'll play some recordings and show images. There's sort of a PowerPoint presentation and talk about Gonzaga's life and how inspiring his story was and is. So that's something that's coming up. And I'm also teaching, if anyone out there is interested in learning about Brazilian music or just learning how to play the accordion, having more music in their life, I'm here, and I've been teaching online since all this craziness started, and it's very rewarding, and I'm enjoying connecting with my students. So please get in touch.
All right, thanks.
Cool.
How about you, Paddy?
Yeah. So I mean, as Bryan mentioned at the beginning, I teach in the musicology area at Florida State University, and I've recently become the director of a really wonderful center there called the Center for Music of the Americas. And I'm gonna, so, stay tuned for that. Look at, Facebook and all these kinds of things. With COVID and all that, we're not doing the normal programming that we do, which usually involves bringing an artist from somewhere. I mean, the Americas writ large, everything from, in the last year, we had a really great Puerto Rican bomba group based in Tampa come and do a residency, which meant a couple public performances, workshops for the public schools, workshops with our students in the College of Music. I'm going to be doing some things like this, some roundtables with artists from a couple of different traditions over the next year or so. And I might keep doing that in the future, even post-COVID, just so that more people, so you don't have to be in North Florida to participate or do something hybrid. And also I'm very excited. I'm preparing a couple of publications with Luizinho Calixto, this great button accordion player, including, some academic type publications in collaboration with him, but also I've transcribed in Western notation, just kind of lead sheet style, all of their family repertoire, like all of their original compositions between the 4 or the 5 accordion players in their family who were composers. And it's something like, I don't know, it's like 450 tunes or something like that. And so I'm working on finding a way to get that published in a way that's accessible to musicians everywhere, and that brings some real recognition of various types to musicians like those guys who really supplied a lot of the, and it's not raw material, it's very refined material to a lot of other Brazilian artists who have taken forró and northeastern music in different and commercially successful directions. So I'm hoping to bring more attention to these guys, without whom none of these super cool world music-y Brazilian projects would even be possible.
Great. How about you, Kate?
Yeah, I guess personally, the most exciting thing happening right now is I'm teaching a class at the University of Maryland. It's the 3rd time I'm teaching a dance ethnography class for non-dancers. And I had my first week this week, and like the COVID thing is like, it's quite a challenge, but I'm really excited about it. This class is all about teaching how to do dance ethnographic research. And cool. So usually it's all about, like, I keep using this word embodiment, but this is what it's about. And I force them to go into a community and learn the dance. And now they're going to be doing it on Zoom or watching videos. But it's not as bad as I thought, teaching dance online. And the wonderful thing is that I can bring in dancers from other parts of the world. So I'll be having Otávio Bastos, who I mentioned earlier. My frevo teacher will be coming in from Brazil. I'm also having a friend coming in from Sri Lanka, a friend coming in from exotic Michigan, who's Nick Garris. I'll give him a shout out. He's an amazing percussive dancer. Yeah. So I'm just really excited about that. And, these are things that I'll hope to continue even after the pandemic, because it's like, why didn't we think of this before, And Bryan, I know that you're also working on a course about artists working in the pandemic, and there's so much to think about, thinking about what liveness is and what embodiment is. And, I've been thinking about it, and I can't wait to hear what my students have to say about it. So that's exciting. And then shifting to my official Educarte spokesperson voice right now. This is like the biggest project really that Pablo and I have been working on for the past more than a year now. And we're just really excited to have this platform. Actually, COVID has given us a great opportunity to just put some stuff out there and get some conversations going, So it's wonderful to have guys like you in conversation. We have had already 3 conversations. And we're just trying to put out more and more content. Our next show is Trio Julio, which is a trio of brothers from Rio, who are wonderful. I saw them a few months ago for the first time on social media, and they just have such a wonderful, charismatic presence. They play choro and instrumental samba, and they're brothers, which is cool, So we're really excited to bring them on. So that'll be on September 22nd. It's a Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And they will, of course, be in Brazil. It'll be 8 p.m. down there. So we're really, really excited about that. And just a reminder, if you enjoyed the show tonight, please donate to Educarte and to the guests. I won't take a cut. I'll give my cut to Educarte. And it's up on the screen at educarte.org/donate.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been such a pleasure and a privilege.
Thank you so much, Bryan, for moderating. And
thanks, Bryan. Yeah, thanks, Kate and Pablo, for the invitation. This was awesome. It's great to talk to all of y'all, and hopefully we can do this again sometime in person.
I'm looking forward to your collaborations.
Yeah, more to come for sure. This is just the beginning.
Yeah. All right.